I'd like to call tonight's special regular meeting to order. Recommendation that the agenda for the special regular council meeting of April 11th, 2017 be adopted with additional items, comments, and reports from council. Moved by Councillor Niche, second by Councillor Cunningham. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, first up, report from Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In early March, we presented the city's preliminary budget and noted a budget shortfall of $160,000, requiring a need to increase the municipal mill rate by 1.5%. We also noted that final BC assessment figures, which were to be released at the end of March, could have impact on this proposal if the final assessed values were less than those used to prepare the draft budget. The final assessed values are in, and the result is a decrease in assessment of $5 million, experienced mostly in the residential property class. Since the preliminary budget was presented, we experienced one of the worst winters in 5 years. Final costs of snow removal and associated ice control came in the latter part of March. The result is a full utilization of our budget for the calendar year with respect to winter maintenance, all within the first quarter of this year. This means we must further budget costs, which we expect to experience at the end of the calendar year. Therefore, staff recommend increasing the budget by $100,000 to plan for the end of the year winter maintenance. If we do not provide the budget for the road maintenance, the city runs the risk of not having adequate resources to keep the roads safe. If there are any accidents that are attributed to inadequate winter maintenance, insurance premiums will rise, in which case taxes will increase to cover. The financial downside to this is that taxpayers' dollars leave the community indefinitely. This increase in financial need results in our final recommendation to increase the municipal mill rate by 2.25% instead of 1.5%. This is 0.75% more than originally proposed. We have recalculated the mill rate so owners can assess the impact this change will have for their planning purposes. It is presented on the screen. Council is requested to direct staff to incorporate the recommended increase into the 5-year financial plan and related property tax bylaws for the purposes of balancing the 2017 budget.
Thank you, Ms. Bauman. I'll quickly open up. As many who are watching probably have seen, that the previous recommendation was a 1.5% increase to cover off just increases that have happened to municipalities. And obviously we had a bad winter, so one of the recommendations now is to do 2.25%. Just to remind folks that last year we were able to keep a 0% increase, but we don't find ourselves in that position this year. And one of the things I'd like to mention to folks is that March 31st is when the assessments come back, which takes the financial department some time to do the reassessments, which is why we're having this meeting today and wasn't at our previous meeting. And when we find ourselves in a situation like many other municipalities all across Canada find themselves in each and every year, and not wanting to do a tax increase but having to take care of the city's budget. We have neighbors of ours like Smithers is facing a 2.69% increase. Terrace is facing a 3% increase. So we're definitely not an isolated area. However, we have some challenges that the city's trying to overcome, like the provincial caps on our taxes, which is significantly putting us in a financial hardship, as well as our Port Ed revenue sharing between the two is definitely over about $1 million that we should be getting in our budget each year. So the community is a bit transition right now. As you know, people saw today that was released online that we have an agreement, a letter of intent signed with Pembina Pipelines for a proposed propane facility on Watson Island, subject to an FID. So some good news along the way, and there's details of that are on our website. And we have AltaGas, which isn't constructed, but once it does, new revenue will come in. So we're in an interesting time where we're in transition from a previous time where not much was happening in the community, but now things are starting, but we're not quite there in this immediate. So we face, once again, a tax situation where we may have to increase. And so these are some of the challenges that we face, and we need to balance this community's interests. We need to balance how we approach the tax situation, because we know that it's been a difficult time for this community moving forward. And we know the residential tax and business tax classes are significantly higher compared to the industrial rates. And so I'm going to open this up to council on what you see as the recommendation, and then perhaps we can figure out a direction here today for our CFO. So any thoughts, Councillor Niche?
Well, obviously, I'd prefer to have no tax increase, but understanding what we have to deal with every day around here, I realize that that's probably not possible. I'd like to, I'm a little disappointed on how we have basically everyone feels that they have input in the coffee shops and they have input everywhere else, but when it comes to a council meeting, we have one person that shows up to our meetings to talk to us about what to spend the money on. So I just would love more people to come out and share their wishes instead of just talking about it on Facebook or talking about it in Tim Hortons. We had 2 budget consultation meetings at the Performing Arts Center the last couple of years with very little people showing up, and this year we decided to do it back in council chambers and had a total of 2 people show up for 2 meetings. So it's difficult for us to sit here and make decisions which affect everybody when we only get 2 people showing up and 1 person speaks. So I know before I was on council, I was a strong believer of, not raising taxes, and now sitting on this side for 2 years, I realize that there's a lot of issues and a lot of things that we need to deal with. That being said, I think that I would be okay with a 1.5% increase, but going into the 2.25% to me is just starting to. We just need to get over that hump and hope that this project that was announced today is going to do good things for us next year. I would like to see it stay at the 1.5, which was originally expected, and if we have snow in November and December, which is we usually typically not that much, then we'll deal with it then. But I would like to keep it at the 1.5% myself, and I would like to change that as an amendment if I could get someone to help me with that support.
Councillor Cunningham?
I'll second that amendment to a 1.5.
You're moving a 1.5% recommendation?
Yeah, and I second it. And I feel that putting it up, I was quite happy with the 1.5. The 2.25, the way it was done, I'm not too happy with. I think that we're looking at a tax increase in the future with expenditures that might come up and might not come up, and I'm with Councillor Neese in the same thing, that hopefully this new project goes ahead and we won't have to worry about nitpicking about little things. But I believe that the people of Prince Rupert have a high enough tax rate now, and our businesses are struggling with the rate they've got, which is even higher than the port cap. And I just think it's time that we've got to hold the line as much as we can and deal with things when they come up.
Councillor Thorkelson?
Ms. Bauman, the report you gave was not part of the report that you gave wasn't in our written information, and I was wondering if you could give me those figures again that you were using with the snow removal.
Which part are you referring to? You mentioned that. I mentioned in the report that the snow costs fully expended all of our budget that we had already proposed. So,
right, which was how much?
It was out of the roads budget. There was $350,000 that's allocated to winter maintenance, and we had spent all $350,000. $100,000 of that would have been in the cost of overtime, sidewalks and catch basins overtime, salt, sand, cold mix for the potholes.
And did we have a surplus left over from the year before on for the snow removal?
No, we didn't get surplus from snow removal in the previous year. There is an amount in the roads that is attributed to projects that weren't completely finished, and that would be the second lift of asphalt on the 2nd Avenue Bridge. That was not spent, and so this year we have allocated some funds for that already, and it's already in the budget.
My memory must be slipping, because I thought I remember you saying that we had a surplus because in our snow removal budget as of the end of last year, and that we were going to use it. Hopefully, we weren't going to have to use it for this year. So I was wondering where that was accounted for and how.
There was some costs of sand that we had ordered but hadn't been delivered, so that amount actually had come forward already for this year.
So we didn't really have a surplus from last year's budget for the snow removal?
Not for with respect to snow. There was still the same amount of cost for ice control and that sort of thing. Although we didn't have a lot of snow, there was still some significant ice, and so there was works that was done all the way throughout the year. Where we recognized a little bit of savings for the roads was in respect to the sand that we did not actually receive by the end of the year. Therefore, there was no expenditure that we could actually recognize.
So that's expenditure for the sand that we bought was put into the expenditure for this year. And I imagine some of that sand was expended in both years, was put on the roads in both years.
No, the sand that we already had, that we had already purchased in last year, or actually that we had left over from the year before, we actually used that last year. So when we reordered sand, it wasn't here by December 31st. It got delivered in 2017, but we since had to actually get more sand because of all the extra snow.
Okay, thank you. And I have a few more questions. I know that you've answered them, but the budget figures are a bit different. So what I am interested in is in the 2016 expenditures. We had a budget of $95,000 to be transferred to reserves in the interest and care fund. And we actually transferred $963,000, so close to $1 million, to the. So that was, as far as I can see, the actuals were $800,000 plus over the budget for 2016. And on top of that, we have an operating funds or a surplus, sorry. Out of our operating fund of $1.7 million. And I understand $700,000, if I remember correctly, around $700,000 is going to capital works, if that is correct, which leaves us with approximately $1 million surplus from last year.
Correct. If you remember, last year we actually came to an agreement with the port over the Pilt, and that was not budgeted for because it happened after the budget process.
Right.
Well, I'm glad we got some extra money. I'm not suggesting. But what I'm wondering is that what's our normal budget that we budgeted for snow removal? And if we've used up our total snow removal for this year, but we must have some sand left over, what would you expect what is our normal snow removal budget or above normal for our usual snow removal budget for November, December?
I don't have the exact figures for me right in front of me for November, December, but as councillors have already mentioned, we don't usually get a lot of snow in November and December. So based on historical information, that's how we arrived at the $100,000 to just be adequately prepared for ice control mainly.
So what I was sort of thinking, councillors, is that if we are running, if we put just under $900,000 more into our transfer to reserves in the interest and care fund, that's not correct?
Sorry, Councillor, that amount is from the sale of Atlan, and that amount had to get transferred over to cover because we had paid off debt with respect to the Atlan property, and we used it out of our land reserves, and then when the sale finalized, because we had to pay off the debt at the 10-year mark, the debenture time to be able to pay off a loan is at the 10-year mark, and that came, and we knew that the sale was actually pending. So once we finally got the money in from the sale of Atlan, we had to transfer it back to the land reserves because we used that amount to pay off the debt associated with Atlan. So that amount there was not actually for anything else other than just that one particular land sale.
So it wasn't transferred to a care and interest fund, it was transferred to the land reserve.
Yeah, transfer to reserves, it includes interest and care fund. The interest is in respect to the reserves that we do hold. The interest that we earn throughout the year, we have to transfer the interest earned from that into the reserves we build up the reserves by the interest earned. So land reserve, any of our other reserves that we actually have, the money that is attributed to those GICs, for instance, the interest has to flow through. This is an accounting entry to just show the transfer of the amount going into the land or other reserves.
Right. So did we only have then $95,000 that was actually going into the interest or into the care fund, I suppose?
Yeah, it was thereabouts.
So the balance of the $963,000 went to the Atlan property?
That is correct.
So that still leaves us, so we accomplished our goal of the $95,000 to go into the what do you want to call it, the care fund? But what we have now is $1 million surplus, operating surplus from last year. And I was just thinking that maybe that we should gamble that we're going to have that $100,000 come out of that surplus. I certainly understand what you have shown, that if we continue to use up our surplus every year, and that is one of the reasons why I wanted the lone councillor on council last year who wanted a increase in taxes was because of exactly what we've run into this year. But my concern is that if we end up with a surplus and we keep rolling it back in, that every year we will budget for more because it creates a surplus to put back in. Well, no, it's the other way around, you see, Your Worship. If you just ride on your surpluses get less and less and less every year, and then you have to have a whopping big 10% increase. I understand that, but the other way around occurs as well. Yeah. If you have a larger than necessary tax increase, then what happens is that you are able now to either spend more money, or you're able to, if you stick within your budget, accrue more money into a savings, operating savings. And so it becomes an accrued operating surplus that you have, and we obviously are going to be using some of that for capital works, which we should well do, and I think that's well budgeted for. But I'm just wondering if we really want to either split the difference and come up with a tax increase of 1.75 and split the difference with the salt or the sand and salt we're going to need for next year's winter, because we've had a bitter winter, and then gamble the other part out of the surplus. That's all I'm wondering if what we should do, which would decrease the needed increase this year, because these budgets, I think, are getting finer and finer and finer, and we probably won't have a large surplus this year, as our treasurer pointed out as our chief financial officer pointed out, that most of that surplus was a one-time surplus. It was gained from a one-time thing, and we don't think we'll have that one-time gain this year. So it was the port paying up, right? So if we don't have, if we're not going to have that 1.7 million surplus because that was a one-time payment, then we're not going to be accruing surpluses. But I still don't know if we want to have a 2.5% or 2.25% tax increase if we have some money if we have some money that we can spend out of our operating surplus. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not exactly thinking that we need to, but I was thinking maybe we should split the difference with ourselves with the budget. That's all. And because we didn't expect to have a big Christmas, a big snowfall at Christmas, and who knows what some of the forecast stuff I heard I didn't really want to listen to, but what it said was because of global warming that we're likely to have more wet, cold weather in the wintertime with more snow, and so I think we should be prepared to look at that. So anyway, that's my feeling. So thank you for answering those questions, and it's just my feeling that maybe we want to cut the difference between so $50,000 out of our out of our operating surplus from last year, and $50,000 out of a tax increase. One out of a surplus and one out of like the $50,000 for a something like that, so that we have we're splitting the difference. So we're going to cover ourselves next year, but we're not going to have above a 2% tax increase. And I just want to say, in my opinion, looking at everything that I know about business, and lots of people think I know too much about business, but I know something about business, is that if you don't budget in for an increase every year, then what all you're doing is putting off what you have to do in the future, because every year your expenses are going to go up. Wages are going to go up. Hydro's going to go up unless the NDP gets in, right? I don't know if they're going to freeze it for municipalities or just for people, and then but everything goes up. All of our expenses go up, and so I think that we are foolish if we don't budget every year at least a 1% increase, and if we don't need it, to put it into reserves that we can use in the future, not to all of a sudden hire 1,000 more people that we don't want, which is what we don't need, which is I think what people think we do if we don't have more money.
Thank you. I think the challenge, I do agree with that, but I think another philosophy is for us to figure out another way to actually significantly increase our revenues, which the opportunity on Watson Island brings. And I think this year we really need to take a really hard look on a strategy around the caps and the Port Ed revenue sharing. I know that this year is going to be renegotiation of the Port Ed revenue sharing agreement. That's $700,000 of the taxpayers' money going to another community, which accounts to 22% of their budget. And we can no longer afford that, and we really need to figure that out. And so those are two huge issues that would not put us in this situation. And if Watson Island becomes an opportunity for this community again, then I think we'll find ourselves in a better situation to have a different type of conversation at budget time. However, if those things weren't to happen, I think you're correct in your assessment that we need to plan for those increases. I do want to open this up to Councillor Kinney on the phone. Do you have any comments, or Councillor Randhawa?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I feel the same way as the rest of the council at this point. But it is hard for everybody. I realize bring it up to 2.5 because we did mention the 1.5, whatever. But we're going to have to learn to live with certain things and do as Joy said, keep putting surplus aside. But at this point, I don't see asking the taxpayers to pay more. No.
Councillor Randhawa, any comments?
Okay, we are talking about the amendment or about the actual motion?
Well, the motion is 1.5% increase. That's the motion. That's the motion. Because we didn't move the recommendation, so that was the motion. So the motion on the floor is a 1.5% increase, which then staff could return with where the other parts will come from.
Okay, yeah, like I understand expenses goes up every year, but on the same hand, our citizen already paying 5% increase on the recreation fees this year, extra 3% on the utility fee, and transit fees every year goes up. And on the other hand, we are getting some extra money from Port Ed, couple 100,000, and we used to pay money on the pulp mill. We're not paying any more those expenses. So, and we get some dividend from City Best. So I understand like expenses goes up, but I think our revenue already gone up, like with 5%, 3%, and people, especially on fixed income with like pension, EIs, their income not goes that up. So I think it's very hard for them to pay that much increase, especially like almost 10%, I would say now, like increase only 1 year. So I'm not in favor of this motion. I think we should keep, at least give them break on the taxes, like we already increase so much in our other taxes.
Which would require some service to be cut if we don't do that, right? So that's just something to think about.
Yeah, like
because we can't balance the budget without
like
at least a minimum of 1.5%. So we'd have to figure out that you'd have to present
like
something to cut, right? That's
like
the
compared
unfortunate part.
to if we keep same level our services compared to last year, right? Like we increase our 5% on the recreation fee, so we should be paying less 5% over there.
But that doesn't change the fact that we have contractual obligations to our union where we, no matter what, baseline need $160,000 more this year. Recreation, that's a different fund, a different process. My point is, if we don't at least go 1.5, we have to present $160,000 reduction in the operating budget somewhere. So something has to get cut to balance the budget, right? That's just the reality, unfortunately, as Councillor Thurkelson said. I think costs go up. We have no control over some of the basic costs, the hydro rates, all those types of things, right?
I understand that. Like, but I'm just comparing last year budget, this year budget. Like, we get 3% extra on utilities this year, right? So,
but that doesn't go into the operating budget.
Yeah, but we should be paying a little bit less over there too, right? On that side, because we getting extra revenue on 5% extra revenue there, right?
They're different funds, Councillor.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's very hard for people, especially like Canary Worker didn't make their EI this year, and they have hard time already. Our small business people, their expenses are already high, and they can compete with our neighboring communities. Any increase will increase their expenses, and it's hard for them to compete with them. So it's very hard, but I'm not in favor of this.
Well, your points are noted for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've heard from all of council, so I'll call question. All's in favor?
Nelson?
In favor? Yeah.
Yeah. Any all opposed? Okay, the motion's carried. Thank you. Okay, so we'll open up to recommendations or reports from council.
Okay, it was brought to my attention today that the Canada 150 anniversary grants have been dispersed in the province of BC. There was 221 of them given out, and Port Ed got 1, Terrace got 4, Kitimat got 1, and Prince Rupert got none. Although I believe there was 6 or 7 grant applications put in, and I would like council to give staff direction to write a letter and find out the reasoning for that. Because I can't see how every community around us got a grant and we got 0.
I'll personally write that letter. Actually, I just heard about that today as well. And, Haida Gwaii, all the communities in Haida Gwaii. I mean, these aren't huge grants. I mean, they're between, $10,000 to $60,000 or $75,000 grants. Every community across the province pretty much gets a grant. I mean, we had many community organizations here apply the special events. We had the museum, the city applied. I mean, to not receive one grant for Canada 150, honestly, it really does baffle me. And I do agree. I would like to send a letter to I believe it was the BC Museums Association or one of the groups that did all the recommendations. I think it's a bit perplexing that our neighboring community of Terrace gets 4 grants, but we don't get. I mean, this is Canada 150. I mean, I don't think it's sweat up anyone's back to at least have one grant for at least special events or the museum. I mean, these are important issues. I'm not sure how how our people in this community who made those applications weren't seen as at least one grant to be applied. At least every other community got one at least. So I'm with you. Councillor Thorkelson, I saw you reaching over there.
Barry spoke so quickly and my brain just lagged behind. I was wondering which grant it was. So you've solved that question, Canada 150.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll write that letter personally. How about that?
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other reports from council? One of the things I've had a few people approach me. We have a provincial election coming up, and some folks asked whether or not what council's views are and things. And I don't necessarily want to be involved with the election, but one of the thoughts that came up was perhaps maybe us as a council could write a list of questions to the candidates that are running, and we can ask them some questions, that we feel are concerns to the community, like the caps and things like that. And I was just wondering if there's anyone on council that might be willing to just sit and maybe think of, or if you're first interested in the idea, and second, if anybody on council would like to sit down to think about those questions, and maybe we could present them to the candidates, and then we could publish their answers online. And some people in the community thought that might be of interest, so thought I'd just probe you guys.
I think that's a great idea. I think the city has a vested interest in this election one way or the other, and I would like to see the candidates be asked some direct questions in regards to the city and how they feel about certain issues with the city and that. And we can either invite them to come to the committee of the whole meeting and answer them in person, or we can, whichever they want. If they want to come before council and answer them in person, I would be happy to see that. Or I don't particularly want a public debate, but just answer the 4 or 5 questions we'll come up with. And I think all of us would be interested in contributing to that.
Any other thoughts?
I think it would be a great idea, but I don't prefer having them in front of me. That is something that, you discuss with the people you're involved with. If they could send them in, fine. Then we can make, some things up to let them know that we would like them to answer the questions.
Yeah, we can decide as a written submission, and we can publish it online through social media. It's where people exist these days anyway, so we can look into that. But if council's interested, maybe after the meeting here, we'll get couple councillors together to formulate some questions, and then we can get those sent out to the candidates and then have them respond, if you guys are interested.
Sure, I think that's an excellent idea. I think that, we certainly need to look after the revenue coming to council, so, it would be I always forget what it's called, but the revenue sharing agreements that they have in the Kootenays and up in the Peace River, and we have that. What's that alliance called? The Revenue Sharing Alliance that we.
The Resource Benefits Alliance.
Benefits Alliance. I think we should ask them a question on whether they're going to support resource benefit sharing with municipalities that in our area, as has been done in the other areas, so that we benefit from resource extraction that doesn't necessarily take place within within the boundaries of the city of Prince Rupert, but will take place in the areas that we have to service. I think that question needs to be put forward, and I think that the question that I've always want to ask is if the provincial government, whichever party is elected, is going to talk to the people of the area before they locate a major project to make sure that it's like we put an industrial park where we want the industrial park, and we all agree on where we want to put the industrial park. We just don't stick it any old place, and so we should be agreeing on where we want to have these major projects go into. And I think that we should ask if they're going to consult the municipalities and regional districts where these large projects that are going to be beneficial to the provincial government and to the local municipalities are going to be located, if they're going to talk to us about that. So we don't end up tearing the whole community apart over things like Flora Banks. Like, nobody in their right mind would have said, okay, let's build an LNG plant right on top of Flora Banks, if anybody had come and asked us ahead of time. So, I mean, I think we should be asking that as well. And I'm sure there's other questions.
Okay, so we'll get that going then. And just last thing is, for those who are interested in the news release today that was released about Pembina, you can go to princerupert.ca. All the details are on the website for your reading pleasure. And at that, I will call the meeting.
Your Worship, maybe you could repeat some of those details if you've got them memorized,
Sure.
Because I think it's important. There's many people who don't go to that, as probably, or the people that are watching us may not have computers. So
I can definitely do that. So the city's been moving forward quickly on Watson Island. We've been diligent in the decommissioning. We released a video about a month ago, and we're about over 80% complete the decommissioning. We transferred a certain portion of lands to Legacy Inc. to help facilitate commercial arrangements on the island now. And so we have entered into a letter of intent to enter into a lease with Pembina Pipelines to explore a possibility of doing a propane export facility for just a portion of Watson Island. And so the company now is exploring the possibility, and they will be doing all their assessments and technical assessments and permitting, things like that. And then if the board of Pembina decides that it is a feasible project, they will make a final investment decision. Upon a final investment decision, a lease will be executed with Prince Rupert Legacy Inc. For a certain amount of time. And if that happens, then we will definitely be in a much better situation as a community, and it's also a beginning of an anchor tenant for the island for us to then develop the island further. And it's the beginning of a good news for this community, and we've been working very hard to ensure that this community prospers into the future.
And Your Worship, maybe you should explain what Pembina is, because maybe many people know of Pembina as the environmental organization.
Right. So Pembina works in Alberta. They're a Canadian company. They work out of the oil sands, and they are a liquids kind of infrastructure company. They have about 11,000 kilometers of pipe all across Alberta and to BC, and this one is one of the derivative products, which is propane. So the proposal would have propane come in by rail. Essentially, the community can look at it as a minified version of the AltaGas project. It's a smaller scaled, less volume type of project like AltaGas, similar process, similar product, and it's just propane. So no processing of propane would be happening on the facility. And Pembina will be coming to the community to do presentations, consult with the community, talk with First Nations, and all those types of things. And they're looking forward to coming to the community and introducing themselves, and we're looking forward to having them here.
Great.
Okay. All right. That being said, I'd like to motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, second by Councillor Niche. All those in favor? Motion carried. Meeting adjourned.